Hello. Today is Tuesday, March 26th, day 172 since October 7th. My name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace. 172 days since the attacks by Hamas on South Israel, since Israel's war on Gaza began. There was some confusion after yesterday's vote at the United Nations Security Council, where the U.S. abstained, and the Security Council's resolution for a ceasefire passed. Israel said that they were canceling all of their meetings with the United States or with U.S. government officials. But the meeting between Secretary Blinken and Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant still happened. And so that was yesterday, Monday, March 25th. And according to the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, the secretary reiterated the U.S.'s support for ensuring the defeat of Hamas, including in Rafah, while reiterating opposition to a major ground operation in Rafah. That's the southernmost city in Gaza that would further jeopardize the welfare of the more than 1.4 million Palestinian civilians sheltering there. The secretary underscored that alternatives exist to a major ground invasion that would both better ensure Israel's security and protect for Palestinian civilians. And Secretary Blinken also discussed the need to immediately surge and sustain additional humanitarian assistance to meet the needs of civilians in Gaza. So one of the things that's significant here, and this is a nuance, is that Secretary Blinken did not express opposition to any ground invasion, but to a major ground operation. So what they're talking about here is opposition to a full-on ground invasion, but not any ground invasion. And I think it's also important to understand it's not that there have not been attacks into Rafah thus far. There have been incursions into Rafah. It's just not been a full-on ground invasion. It's also important to note that the Israeli delegation that was supposed to talk about alternatives to Rafah was canceled because of Prime Minister Netanyahu's disgust of the U.S. abstention at the United Nations. And so those dynamics continue. In terms of hostage and ceasefire discussions, Hamas rejected the U.S.'s most recent proposal for hostage release and a ceasefire deal. Hamas's Politburo chief, Ismail Haniyeh, will reportedly travel to Tehran to meet with top Iranian officials. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said in response that the organization's position, quote, clearly proves that it is not interested in continuing negotiations and reaching a deal, end quote. There is this blame. All parties are passing the blame back and forth, and there continue to be really ardent protests in Israel against Netanyahu and against the Israeli government saying, make a deal, bring these hostages home. And the pressure needs to be on all parties, on Hamas, release the hostages, lay down your weapons, on Israel, make a hostage deal happen, on all parties for a comprehensive ceasefire. A partial Israeli delegation remains in Qatar to continue negotiations for the truce and the release of hostages. While Netanyahu says that it's clear Hamas is not interested in a deal, another Israeli source has said that the deal has not collapsed. Amit Susana, who was a woman kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, has said that she was sexually assaulted at gunpoint in Gaza. She gave an interview to the New York Times, and according to Susana, during her captivity, she was kept alone. She was handcuffed by the ankle to a window in a child's room in a private home. In Gaza, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society reported that the Al-Amaa hospital in the southern Gazan city of Khan Yunis has stopped operating after the IDF evacuated it and blocked the entrances. The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, told the UN Human Rights Council that she believed the Israeli military campaign in Gaza since October 7th does amount to genocide, and she has called on countries to immediately impose sanctions and an arms embargo on Israel. And the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, called on the international community to sever diplomatic relationship with Israel if it does not comply with the UN Security Council resolution that passed yesterday, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. So one of the things that we'll talk about more is what's the significance of that UN Security Council resolution? Is it binding? The US representative to the UN said it's not binding. How can it be enforced? I think that's a really critical discussion. Britain's Air Force airdropped more than 10 metric tons of food for the first time yesterday, according to their defense ministry. German Foreign Minister Baerbock, currently in Tel Aviv amid a Mideast tour, said that international organizations must be allowed to deliver aid to Gaza unhindered. Now, what will it take for aid to get into Gaza unhindered? It will take a ceasefire. Aid cannot get into North Gaza. It cannot get into anywhere in Gaza while there is bombing and while there's a ground invasion. According to the foreign minister, and this is a direct quote, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is hell, end quote. The Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer told NPR that the claim that Israel is deliberately denying food is blood libel against Israel. Now, I don't know how that could be blood libel when clearly there are direct quotes, and you can see them on video, where Netanyahu and his government very clearly articulated no food, no water, no gas until all hostages are returned home. This was the mantra at the very beginning after October 7th. So if that's not denying food to Gazans, I don't know what is. We can show Ron Dermer the videos. The Israeli-controlled health minister in Gaza, I'm sorry, I don't know what I just said, but the health ministry in Gaza has reported the death toll is now at 32,414. U.S. senior officials have expressed the desire to lower tensions between the U.S. and Israel that has been expressed in the meetings with Gallant. Sources familiar with the meetings said U.S. Secretary of State told Gallant that while Israel has Washington's support for the defeat of Hamas, including Rafah, the administration believes that a major ground operation would risk more than 1.4 million civilian lives. Blinken underscored that alternatives exist to a major ground invasion that would both better ensure Israel's security and protect Palestinian civilians. And then I wanted to talk just a minute in the West Bank. Israeli forces arrested 14 Palestinian suspects overnight last night. And in Lebanon and Syria, there was a major barrage of 40 rockets fired at northern Israel from Lebanon, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. They were targeting an air base. A fire broke out at a winery in northern Israel that 2 rockets hit. The Israeli Defense Forces said they struck Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon. And then an Iran-aligned Lebanese channel reported that Israel had struck a truck near the city of Al-Harmal in northern Lebanon. That's the northernmost attack in Lebanon since the war began. And a further Air Force strike later on Tuesday, deep in Lebanese territory, struck a Hezbollah site in Tel Vardin. The Israeli sources also confirmed that the IDF attacked Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps targets in northeastern Syria overnight. And the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is affiliated with Syrian opposition, reported that 15 people were killed. Houthis, things in the Red Sea, hostilities continue. The Yemen Houthis said that they attacked 4 ships in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea in the last 72 hours. And the Red Sea attacks targeted 2 U.S. destroyers. So that is a bit of the news in the last 24 hours. Our work in calling for a ceasefire continues to be so critical. So please continue in your prayers, in your activism, in talking to elected officials. It's so critically important.